We also like this to be very interactive. So if you have questions, feel free to ask questions. We might ask some questions of you. And there might be prizes, so, you know, that's kind of fun. So Cindy said I had 30 years experience, and just for the record, I started when I was 12. So, you know.
The prizes are free airfare?
Yes, right. So Lauren and I, so we're gonna walk you through several different topics at DFW. So you might hear a lot about DFW, but we want you to know that we don't just talk the talk, we walk the walk. So we're gonna show you a lot of stuff. I know it's a lot of information. If there's any piece of this that you would ever like us to come back and speak more about, just let us know. Be happy to do that. So first we're gonna give you some DFW by the numbers. I love infographics. And this is a fun infographic that just tells you amazing stuff about DFW. Did y'all know that DFW is the #2 busiest airport in the world right now? That's so cool. Yeah, super cool. So I should have asked you this question before we got to the slides. Hide it. Hey, well, go back one. Let's see who's paying attention. So anybody know how many runways we have at DFW?
A lot. 26.
So strips of pavement, so not counting runway in. 6, so I had her 6. I'm sorry?
I go 6 also.
6?
I said 26.
14. 14. 8.
I heard the right answer somewhere.
Yeah, I heard somebody say the right answer. Roxana doesn't count. Somebody said 7.
7?
Who
Who was
said
our
7?
7?
One of y'all did. I'm sure I heard 7. Anyway, we have 7 runways. So, which is very large number of runways. One thing unique about DFW is none of them cross. So a lot of times you see airports and they've got 5 runways, but they're crossing one another. When you cross runways, it limits your ability to use the runway because you essentially land and hold short. We don't have that issue. So we'll go to the next slide and then the next one. So there's our 7 runways.
On that
Yes.
data, when was the data created, what year? Like 2019, 2021, what?
It says it said September 30th, 2021. So
Okay.
that's
Pretty recent.
Yeah, so pretty recent. Yeah, they update it every year or so. So if you flip one more, so here's our 7 runways. So Grapevine being up in this area. So 4 main parallels, or actually 5 technically, and then 2 diagonal runways, and 5 terminals in the middle. Over 17,000 acres, so larger than the island of Manhattan. Next slide. So this is some interesting facts of just about the amount of infrastructure that's on our airport. I just think this is super cool. 75 million square feet of pavement on the airfield. That's a lot. 133 land bridges. I love this one. So 1,288 lane miles of roadways. So if you laid all that out linear, you go from here to San Diego. So just all on that little footprint that we call DFW. Okay, next slide. So great economic engine, about 60,000 jobs created at DFW Airport and 37 billion in economic activity annually. And I understand that number is outdated and they're updating it and it's higher, a lot higher. Yeah, that's cool. We do lead the industry in a lot of ways. Near and dear to our heart is the environmental awards, which are on this side. So we are the first airport accreditation for airport carbon neutral airport. We were the first large hub airport to achieve that in North America. And so there's a few other airports, but we were the first in North America. And we were the first large hub in the world. Also, we just got an award from the United Nations for our climate action.
So we actually beat out, like, I think, what is it? Someplace in Japan has a really carbon neutral airport, or New Zealand, or anyways.
I know Schiphol in Amsterdam was ahead of us. Probably, I think Changi in China. There were several. There was like 7 or 8 in the world when DFW got its accreditation, but we were the first ones considered a large hub.
What does that entail?
So, in terms of the accreditation, so it basically, it means that we're trying to neutralize any carbon emissions that we can control. So it doesn't count the airplanes, but we're looking at how can we become carbon neutral. So we look at, our energy utilization, we even look at corporate travel. Because that contributes to our footprint that we generate. Every time we get on a plane to go on a business trip, we're generating a footprint, so we have to take that into account. What we couldn't offset, we buy credits to get us to carbon neutrality. As you'll see some other slides, we've got an even more ambitious goal than that.
What do you mean by you buy credit?
So there are credits that you can buy through the state, and it might be that invest in like wind farms to improve wind farms. So you're paying money to buy a credit, and then that money is used for other beneficial carbon reduction efforts.
Outside of DFW?
Generally in our region, but sometimes they're outside our region, but still in the state. We work with the Texas Commission on Environmental Quality.
But we want to do more than just focus on carbon offsets and carbon emissions. And so the airport's developed a sustainability master plan, and these are kind of our North Stars, what we look to guide us in our decision making moving forward. So we have these different focus areas within our sustainability management plan. We have climate action, which we were just talking about, but also energy performance, water and biodiversity, health, safety and wellness, equity, and a circular economy. And so we'll kind of give you a little snapshots as we go through the presentation today of some of the activities we're doing in these categories. First up is the circular economy and waste. So when you think of waste, you usually think of waste diversion. How do you avoid getting it to landfill? This takes it one step further, and how can we incorporate our waste products back into beneficial reuse? So having that circularity of your waste streams getting reincorporated into new products. Our goal within the circular economy is to hopefully achieve zero waste by 2040. Some of the activities we think that are going to get us there are our zero waste strategy within the terminals. We have a materials management site that is made to divert construction waste from landfills and then repurpose it on other projects on airports. So we may pull a panel for doing a pavement repair within our runway. It'll get crushed at the Eastham mess and then can be used as fill and aggregate underneath a new roadway or a driveway going into one of our new facilities. We also have an organic waste recovery program that I was going to talk about a little bit more. So you may have seen it in the news within the last year. DFW has really taken off with our composting program with our concessionaires, and here's just a little video that we wanted to share with you.
Every passenger in every terminal on every day generates 1 pound of trash. That's DFW's average. But DFW's aspiration is every cook and every server in every restaurant separating what is trash.
A server will come in and then they'll clean their plate off, and through here they'll put their plate there and their silverware there, but then they'll put the trash over here.
From what is not.
Basically, if it came from the ground, it can be composted.
DFW International Airport launched a composting program in one kitchen in one restaurant in 2021. It took off in 2022.
We are now in 25 different restaurants in 3 terminals, and we are acquiring more every day.
A Dallas-based company called Turn is training kitchen staff. They're still throwing real trash in the trash, but all food waste, all scraps, meat, dairy, oil, goes into a green bucket.
Like I have one location that has 15 receptacles.
Turn employees pick up the buckets each day and compost everything in them. All that food becomes fertilizer for local community gardens. DFW says this program has kept more than 100 tons of waste out of local landfills.
Have a zero waste goal by 2030, and there's no way we can achieve that goal without this element of it.
Every new restaurant or concession stand that opens here must commit to composting. Airport passengers create trash. That's a given. But an airport going totally green?
We can no longer be a society that takes. We have got to be a society that puts things back into the cycle again.
That's the goal. At DFW Airport, I'm Teresa Woodard.
Where is the composting actually done?
Turn has a facility, I'm not sure where it's located at, it's not on airport property.
Okay, that's not on the property.
And then just as an update, from the time that video was made till now, we've actually expanded the composting program to all 5 of our terminals. We don't have 100% participation from concessionaires yet, but we're working towards that in the coming years. So it's really bringing that circularity waste concept to life, going from food to compost, back to food again. So we hope that we can continue to grow this program moving forward.
So before you move on, another thing we wanted to mention is we also recycle all the cooking oil, and that gets recycled. So we had a question on that. Does anybody want to guess how many 1,000 pounds of cooking oil we recycle per year? These wild guesses. We're educated guesses. How many 1,000 pounds?
Well, does a gallon of cooking oil weigh the same as a gallon of water?
I think it's heavier. A gallon of water is what, 8 pounds?
The biochemist over there.
What's that jet fuel?
I would say around close to 1 million.
A little less than that.
750?
750.
Getting warmer.
600.
Getting warmer.
Oh. 500.
Well, we recycle a lot, but not quite that.
Oh, okay.
How much?
100,000.
100,000?
75.
Okay, up a little higher. So now we're between 100 and 500. How much?
50.
Oh, there you go, that's
You're
close
close enough.
It's 231,000.
Yeah.
That's what gets recycled or does not get?
It gets recycled, so they say that it gets recycled and I believe repurposed into fuel. Yes.
So where all does the compost go after it's ready to?
In the story, they talked about some of their partners are the community gardens. I'm not sure who else is purchasing from Turn, but they resell
So
the
we can go
compost.
buy a bag?
I
I
think
think
so.
you can. Yes, you can.
Oh, you can?
I think so.
Oh.
Yeah.
I have a question, please. So is it incentive for a restaurant to participate?
Well, we're requiring the food composting, and
So is
they're
it required?
Yeah, and they're incentivized by us recycling the cooking oil. It used to be they had to
Go somewhere.
get rid of the cooking oil, we put them in barrels and we'd hauling them out of the terminal, and goodness knows what if you dumped it and spilled it, it'd be a mess. Now we pipe it all out and we make it really easy for them. So it's really not optional for them. This is how we dispose of cooking oil at the airport, but it pipes through pipes and goes into an area where we can collect it and recycle it.
But food composting is not.
They're not paid to compost, but I would assume that they're incentivized from the reduction in their waste bills. Since you don't have to
Exactly,
pay to get rid of the composting,
Right.
it's a free service for them.
It's recycled.
For the
oil.
The oil, so one of the uses, there's several uses. One of them, through a refinement process, they actually use it to make what's called sustainable aviation fuels. And then they blend it with normal fuels. And so the sustainable aviation fuels is something that's really kind of our future of aviation fuels. So it's made with oil, it's made with corn, it's made with algae, it's made with all sorts of different natural materials. And there's processes and various companies that are working with the EPA to get their fuels certified. So they can, and they're starting to be used in aircraft. So it's a blend of the sustainable aviation fuel and then normal jet fuel. So that's one of the uses. Oh, that's scary.
Oh, no. What the heck was that?
I didn't touch it. Okay, I think this is actually nice.
No, okay.
Oops.
I don't know what's happening.
Oh, I'll stay away from the wire.
Electrifying.
Do you think at one point that they would start to, like mandate to use compostable, like utensils, like spoons and forks? At some point,
We are looking,
in Seattle,
yeah.
they have that, I mean, they have to have compostable, everything, straws and,
Yeah.
you know, I mean, that's a great idea, why can't we do that?
So we do that with the straws. So we've eliminated all plastic straws. So they have to be biodegradable or compostable. So we've done that with the straws. The challenge you have, like with, at restaurants, if you left your food on your plate, they can get it and compost it. But a lot of people, they grab and go, they grab their drink, and before they get on the plane, into the trash it goes. So it's hard to segregate out some of those materials, but we're looking for ways that we could do that. And if you make it compostable, to me, if it goes in the garbage, it's still better than like plastic.
Right.
Yeah, and some of the restaurants are doing that, just kind of on their own.
So I know I'm not sure if all part of Austin, but my friend live north of Austin, and they composting food. So I don't know.
Yes. In fact, the Austin
Is the whole
Airport.
city of Austin or?
I'm not sure. I know that airport did this cool thing where, a vendor puts out pre-prepared sandwiches. And so you go, all these ham sandwiches, turkey sandwiches that you can grab for your flight. But they have a certain shelf life. So it might say, best by, whatever day. Well, at the end of that day, they can no longer sell it, but it's still good. And so what Austin has done is they gather those things up and they take them to schools and provide them to, kids who wouldn't necessarily have a way to have lunch. Because the food has been determined, it is still good, but it's past a certain day where the vendor can sell it. So they're making good use of that and getting it into where it can be effective. Good questions. Moving on in interest of time, so one of our other North Stars is climate action. So we're doing that in a variety of ways, and we have a whole roadmap to our net zero carbon goal to be net zero by 2030. So that's 20 years ahead of the industry. Now these are for things that we can control. So obviously the aircraft is a big component, but the airport doesn't have control over that. So we're looking at what can we control. One of the things is how we distribute energy to our terminals. So we're looking at a zero emission central utility plant. We'll talk a little bit more about that. We've electrified vehicles, we're using renewable fuels, which renewable is where methane, which is a waste product out of a landfill, is harvested, refined, and that fuels our vehicles. So that's a super cool thing. And then carbon removal techniques, which is like in concrete and that type of thing. So is our video the next slide, or, yes? So we got another little video here.
I just turned off the audio, hold on one
Okay.
second.
Oh, okay,
Those speakers.
okay. See how it works.
Right,
Okay.
wanna try it?
Here we go.
Sustainability has become part of DFW's DNA. As one of the largest airports in the world, we were compelled to reduce our carbon footprint. We know maintaining carbon neutrality through offsetting is not an alternative to action. That's why we have committed to an ambitious goal to achieve net zero carbon emissions by 2030, 2 decades ahead of the United Nations global target. When DFW became the first airport in the world certified at the highest level of the Airport Carbon Accreditation Program, we established a leadership position to influence climate action on a global scale. Our roadmap and decarbonization strategy are built on 3 core areas: a continued transition to renewable energy sources, efficiently optimizing our facilities and fleet, and ultimately, the use of carbon removal technology. Each year, we conduct an inventory of our carbon footprint to ensure we eliminate each component by 2030. Among other initiatives to reduce emissions, DFW has already eliminated electricity generation as a source of emissions by purchasing 100% renewable electricity, and we further reduced emissions by transitioning to a renewable natural gas-powered bus fleet.
Apologize.
Hopefully you can hear it.
Between 2010 and 2020, DFW achieved a 79% reduction in carbon emissions. By 2030, DFW will achieve net zero through completion of ongoing emission reduction initiatives and through carbon removal, not offsetting. As the economic engine of the North Texas region, we are proud to be leading the airport industry in a quest for a more sustainable and resilient future. We continue to transform travel so that our passengers can travel confidently.
My apologies.
No worries. And I think that was our last video.
It was.
So, yeah. Okay, so, we have a roadmap to net zero, if we wanna get there by 2030, obviously, we needed to start way ahead. So we started in the renewable natural gas, converting to 100% renewable wind energy, which actually, saves us a lot of money. So, you know, you think about, sometimes people think about sustainability, it's like, oh, it's so expensive. It actually makes really good business sense. So by converting to wind energy, we're saving, it's at least $1 million a year, I don't know the exact number. But then as we roll forward, we have other initiatives that we want to implement to get us to our roadmap. So one of the things we look at is not only reducing the carbon footprint, but reducing emissions. So emissions are essentially the output from various activities, like your car's exhaust creates emissions. And there's two types of chemicals that is what forms ozone. So it's nitrous oxides, NOx, and then volatile organic compounds. You don't need to remember all that, but does anybody have any idea of, not counting aircraft, what do you think would be the biggest generator of emissions at DFW Airport?
Airplanes.
Besides the airplanes, we can't control them, or the cars, so.
Buses.
Yeah, no, the buses we've electrified or converted to renewable natural gas, so that helps. One of the biggest items.
Probably air conditioning and heating. It's a large area that has doors opening and closing all the time.
Yep, so, what a goodie bag. So yes, it is our central utility plant that we use to heat and cool our terminals, and so they, you know, boilers and chillers that run, and they have to run like all the time to keep our terminals going. We actually found a way to optimize that. So one of the things we do is we figured out we don't have to run them all the time, and we can still keep the terminals cool. You know, we run them at night, and then use that circulated air during the day, so we don't put as much pressure on the grid. But so if we go to the next slide, I think, so one of our next initiatives is an electric central utility plant. So essentially, we use electricity to heat and cool our terminals. So that, when we go to the next slide, some cool things, this is my favorite, reducing those bad chemicals, NOx, by almost 86%, just from replacing how we heat and cool our airport. It also reduces carbon by about 15.3 million kilograms. Provides jobs for us to build and improves the regional air quality. How are we doing on time? We actually just got a grant from the FAA of $35 million to help us build this central utility plant. So it doesn't come from taxpayer dollars, it comes from the FAA. Most of those funds are generated by, if you buy a ticket and you fly on a plane, a portion of what you pay is a tax that goes into a trust fund. Or there's also what's called passenger facility charges that are also collected, and those fund the infrastructure of airports so that we can continue to serve the public and serve safely.
So the money comes from those passenger fees.
Yeah. And
This is not part of the bill money coming out.
That's a separate one, but yeah, that's another source of funding for us, yeah. The bilateral,
Yeah, bipartisan,
yeah,
something.
yeah, infrastructure law, yeah.
When do y'all expect the electric plant to be done, or the utility plant, I should say?
They're supposed to start construction, I believe it's the beginning of this coming year. And so I think it's about a 3-year project to get it fully online.
When would it be?
So it's right between the terminals, if you go up and down International Parkway, between the terminals, there's a north and south, and there's an infield area. So our existing central utility plant is in that infield area. So it'll go in that same infield area, I think on the north side.
But what you don't see is that there's 2 miles worth of tunnels underneath International Parkway that the piping is running to distribute it to each of the terminals from there. So it's a pretty extensive project.
Yes.
On your previous slide, you said you had something mentioned about trees. And about 9 years ago, 8 or 9, 10, I was doing a part-time job out at the airport, and I think it was the time Terminal A was about to be remodeled, and there was huge oak trees that were chopped down. And so now 10 years from there, I still see the stumps. So like, why did they have to get chopped down? Because that space didn't get used, but do you have, I mean, you've been there long enough to have that memory maybe.
I do, so also at about that time, TxDOT was doing the connector project, so the connector was coming into DFW, so we were redoing that whole entryway. We also rebuilt the control plazas, so where they used to be linear, when we built the new ones, we had to offset them. But now it's got a new, way to get in and out of the airport that's much more up to date. But part of that process, they thought they needed to remove the trees. Frankly, from a wildlife safety perspective, they were providing roosting for a lot of birds. Birds and aircraft don't mix. So I cried when the trees got removed, as did a lot of people, but there were reasons to do it, and one of the primary reasons was the wildlife attractants. So, but
you bring up a
pointed
great
out
point. That
trees.
was a perfect segue.
Perfect
So the next
segue,
North
yes.
Star that we're looking at is on water and biodiversity. And so that includes all of our plant life at the airport as well. We have a goal of being water and nature positive by 2040, and this will include actions such as water conservation, water quality and watershed management, and then tree conservation is something we're going to take a closer look at. So if you were to guess, how much % canopy cover do you think DFW has?
Trees
Tree canopy cover, knowing that we have big old airfield in the middle.
over the whole property.
Over the whole property.
30%.
That's a little high, but
22,
ooh, you are so close.
21.
It's 23%.
Wow.
Good job. Would you
Said
like another
21.
goodie bag?
give it to a kid.
So, knowing that we have quite a large property to maintain and be stewards of, the airport has taken a look at our tree conservation plan and developed one. So just to start out as to why and how we got people at the airport on board with developing a tree conservation plan, it helps to take a look at why it's important to protect our trees. So if you look at just nationwide trends, urban tree cover is on a steep decline. And Texas, unfortunately, is leading the way in some of the development. So Texas is number 3 at annual tree loss and number 1 for increase in impervious surfaces. So increasing the paved surfaces, causing runoff issues. And that's not a place that we really want to be. And so, like we were just talking about, the 23% canopy cover, that was where we were at when we assessed in 2020. But it wasn't long before that we were sitting at 24.2%. So just like our state, DFW is developing at a rapid rate, and we need to put some protective measures in place to make sure that as we further develop, the tree canopy cover is maintained. It's not always the case that people are mindful of removing trees, because what does it cost you when you cut down a tree? You don't have to go and pay your city for increasing the stormwater runoff from your site. You don't have to go and pay your neighbor because now their pinch isn't shaded because you cut the tree down on your property. And you definitely don't have to pay for the degradation of air quality. And so it's because that there isn't a cost for doing that our ecosystem services aren't really valued in the decision making we have. Here's a quote from Costanza talking about because ecosystem services aren't fully captured in commercial markets or adequately quantified in terms comparable with economic services and manufactured capital, they're often given too little weight in policy decisions. So Costanza is thought of as being kind of the forefront of developing the concept of ecosystem services. And we'll just take a couple minutes to talk through what some of those ecosystem services are that trees are providing. So when you think of the benefits that trees provide, there's the obvious, you can make wood or they produce fruit, and that would be something like provisioning services. But there's also the regulating services, cleaning the air and things of that nature, as well as cultural services that people benefit from trees. And so when you look at the regulating and supporting services, most people at first think carbon sequestration, carbon storage from trees, and that's a big benefit. But in addition to that, they also provide a whole host of other services, such as temperature regulation and energy savings. Having trees near your house providing shade can reduce the energy demands on your building. If you have enough trees within the region, can reduce the overall temperature and moderate the urban heat island effect that we normally experience around here. And then air purification. In addition to carbon dioxide, they also capture and store other harmful contaminants such as NOx and VOCs that Sandy was mentioning earlier, which help to have cleaner air for us to breathe and improved health benefits. There's also noise mitigation, stormwater management, and of course biodiversity conservation. As we continue to landscape all of our lawns and developed areas, we're losing that natural biodiversity that was present here before, which has a cascading effect through all of the other species present. In addition, if you look at some of the cultural services, it's not just the environmental benefits, but you also have increased property values. They have studies that show having greater tree coverage improves safety. There's also that social connectedness. Everybody loves to go to spaces that have the green space where you can feel relaxed, have that sense of well-being, and connect with the others that you're with. And they also have studies that show that there's increased education and learning benefits just being in and around trees. So because of all of that, DFW developed a tree conservation plan with the overall goal of establishing how we're going to approach development moving forward. The plan's been in place or in development for a couple of years, but we're just now getting to projects that are actually implementing the tree conservation plan. We have a goal of no net loss of tree canopy cover from our baseline year, which we talked about at 23%. And in order to do that, we're going to have requirements on all construction moving forward. So we've established a preservation requirement as well as a tree requirement. And if the projects are able to meet those requirements, then their plan is approved. Before they go out, during design, they'll conduct a tree survey of the site where they go and they take measurements of the DBH. Any tree larger than 6 inches DBH is going to be protected. And then the preservation and tree requirements are based off of what was existing on the site at the time of development. 25% of the existing DBH has to be maintained throughout the development, and then their tree requirement has established based on the intended land use. So the mixed-use commercial spaces have a higher requirement than something like a large industrial warehouse, as well as roadways.
Can you clarify what you mean by 25% of the DBH has to be maintained?
So when you go and you do your tree survey for your site, if you, for example, have 100 DBH inches of trees, you would have to maintain 25 DBH inches of trees on your site. You could not cut them down.
Even though that some of them might be over 6 inches?
Yes, but only over 6 inches are protected. So if it's 2 or 3 inches, it doesn't get counted into that 100. Okay. Does that make sense? Okay. And then as you plant trees to get to your tree requirement, it's weighted based on what those trees would grow to at full height. So something small like a crepe myrtle is just given a 1-for-1. But if you plant something like a large canopy, like an oak tree, you get 2-to-1 ratio for your planting. And so we, like I said, are just now getting to projects that are underway. One of the projects is actually in Grapevine. The Dart Silver Rail line is coming through. That's the image on the top with the blue line. They've had to increase their rail right-of-way in order to bring in this new line. They did their tree survey and they're going to be mitigating for the impacts, not within their right-of-way because that could cause issues with train service, but in another DFW property location, they're planting their trees. And so we have some other projects that are upcoming as well that are working to incorporate these requirements.
Question, these projects that you're talking about, and you see something that says industrial, but you know, the airport, you always see these signs, the airport property was far flung, and now there's car dealerships on it. And now there's all kinds of things on it. Are those things, is that the project you're talking about?
Those type of projects that are on the periphery are the projects that would be most impacted by this plan. In addition, as we go about developing and maintaining our own facilities where DFW employees work, they'll also be required to be doing that. So we are building new buildings in support of the staff at DFW as well.
So
So just for clarity too, so the tree conservation plan is really now coming into effect. So we had projects before where there wasn't the requirement, and so, you know, whatever trees were there were taken out for the benefit of the development. The airport having so much land, one of the things that we do is we develop, commercially, so warehouses and such on the airport. I'm not a fan, but at the same token, when over COVID, when airplanes quit flying, that revenue kept coming in, so it's non-airline dependent revenue. So it does have that advantage in the revenue that the airport gets. A lot of it's related to aviation, obviously, but now we have this commercial development that's continually providing revenue to the airport, and that is beneficial. So when we look at these things, we have to look at them holistically to consider the whole needs of the organization.
So when they, let's say they take out the trees, but they're replanting them somewhere else within the DFW property. So they're replanting them, obviously not as big as they took out, so therefore the bird impact, let's call it, would not affect the airplanes, but then at some point they're gonna grow up into big trees and the birds are gonna roost in them. So like, what's that, 20, 40-year plan?
We have, throughout the airport, a lot of things that contradict our ability to, keep birds away. Sandy will eventually get to, we have protections in place where we do a nest survey before they even start work, and if we find them, they have to stay in place. So it's a constant balance and struggle. Our Ops Wildlife team goes out and they look where there is active bird activity and addresses those areas as they arise. They don't go and cut down trees as part of that, but they would go, and if there's other sources like sunflowers are big right now at attracting birds, they'll go and address those issues. So it is constantly a moving target, and it evolves, and I think it's just a balance. So.
And to that point, so I like rabbit trails. Quick rabbit trail. At one point in time, FAA said, well, you need to remove your lake because it's a wildlife attractant. Like, well, number one, it provides, a lot of benefits, but we got to realize, it's like, okay, if we have bird strikes, what type of birds get struck? And oddly enough, it's not the waterfowl as a rule. So if you removed the lake, and let's say you turned it into a field, well, what is the biggest problem we have at the airport? It's those field dwelling type birds. In fact, so we had like a big problem with, certain birds that were coming in, and we actually, it's kind of weird, quick rabbit trail, if they found a dead bird, they would literally cut its stomach open and find out what is it eating? What's the food source that's attracting it to the airport? They hired a botanist who said, oh, there's seeds, those are the seeds of whatever. Went out and found them on the airport. It was just some wild growing weed in a field. So that's kind of how we work to maintain the wildlife. So trees provide habitat, the water provides habitat, but they're looking for food source and food, water, and shelter. And so we look at those types of things. So like Lauren said, it all has to be a balance.
And you said the lake, you talking about Grapevine Lake?
Trig Lake, which is actually on the southern portion of our airport.
So you get a heck of a fight.
Oh, yeah, we're not messing with Grapevine Lake, no. Okay, this is coming back to the North Stars, and so the next thing I'm gonna talk about kind of takes all of these North Stars and said, okay, if we were gonna consider all of this in our development, how do we do that? So, one of the ways we do this is it's a federal law, actually, it's called NEPA, so it's the National Environmental Policy Act. And the next slide has a bunch of words on it, but basically this applies to all federal agencies. And anytime they make a decision, then that triggers NEPA. And that means that they have to consider the environmental impacts that could arise from that project that they're gonna develop. And then find ways to either avoid them, minimize, or mitigate those impacts. So we work with the Federal Aviation Administration, FAA. So the two primary ways that they have a federal decision is if they're gonna fund a project for DFW, like the electric cup, 35 million. The other thing is we have an airport layout plan that the FAA has to approve. So anytime we change that, like we're gonna build something, we're gonna expand, we're gonna remove, that requires them to approve that, that's a federal decision. So it again triggers NEPA. So pretty much everything we build on the airport involves NEPA. So what does NEPA do? What we're doing is we're looking at the project and saying, how is this project affecting the environment? This is just kind of a quick snapshot of levels of NEPA. The simplest is what's called a categorical exclusion. It's a very minimal document, but it's basically when you have a project that's not gonna impact anything, it's not gonna hurt anything, you're just documenting that fact. Or it has minimal impacts that you can easily mitigate. The second level is an environmental assessment, and that's when you have, maybe you have hazardous materials, or you have something that would not make it fit into the lower category. And then this last category, environmental impact statement, thankfully, we don't trigger that. That's when you have a project that is gonna impact the environment, period. So now you're at this big level of how are you gonna mitigate your impact. So what we do is we look at, NEPA, we look at 21 environmental categories. Some of them don't apply to the airport, like coastal resources, wild and scenic rivers, we don't have to worry about those. So some of the primary ones are air quality, we have to look at aircraft noise, the biodiversity, biological resources, we look at threatened and endangered species, Migratory Bird Treaty Act, which I'll talk about in a minute, energy, climate. Our airport's almost 50 years old. So we have to consider, is there anything on the airport that has historical significance? And then if so, that triggers a whole process, and then we also look at section 4F, which could be a park, or it could be a historic resource. So this is just kind of a sampling of what we have to look at. And so we take a project and we look at all of these categories. Now, we might have a project, say we're gonna build one of these warehouses. Okay, well, it's not gonna have noise impact, because it's not changing aircraft operations, it's not gonna affect farmlands, there's nothing historic. Some of these we can eliminate, and then say, okay, these are the categories that would apply to the project, and those are the ones we research.
Well, unless they dig the ground and there's a mammoth tooth down there, so there's that.
Yeah, and our cultural looks at human history, so we've done archaeological studies, cultural resource studies, historical studies, and we basically worked with the Texas Historical Commission to clear most of the property. But it's interesting, we did find a mammoth tooth, we actually found another one the other day.
Oh, didn't hit the news.
Oh my, no, not yet.
Do they section it off and have the people with the brushes out there for like 10 days?
No, nothing that extensive, but it is amazing what we're finding on our airport. So, especially in the drought.
Do they preserve it? Do they preserve the mammoth tooth, meaning does it?
Well, so we work with SMU, and so SMU is a certified lab, and so most of the artifacts we find we give to SMU, and then they have to preserve them in perpetuity. They research them. You probably heard back when the airport was being built, they found the remains of a dinosaur, the plesiosaur, which was an aquatic dinosaur. So SMU has our plesiosaur. There's actually they said about 6 species of dinosaur that I identified on airport and in the airport area. There's some in Grapevine, there's some like dinosaur tracks in Grapevine. It's super cool.
You know, talking about air quality, I noticed that I don't see it as much anymore, but they used to have the firefighting classes here, international classes, like, you know, teaching other firefighters how to put fires out of an airplane. I don't see it as much,
They do it quite regularly, yes.
Okay, I haven't seen the smoke as much.
Yeah.
Do they do it at certain times of the year, or?
They do it year round. We get notifications, you know, the Fire Training Research Center is active today or something, so it kind of varies. And during COVID, of course, they couldn't really do a whole lot of it, but they do burn propane, so it's a clean burning fuel, and then we report that to the state of how much fuel is consumed per year. So it is, and it's the only facility of its kind. People come from all over the world to train at our facility. It's really first class. And we've got an A380 mock-up, so an A380 is a huge aircraft. You know, so they use that for their training. It's pretty impressive. So we just mentioned nest surveys. So in certain times of the year identified as nesting season, then we have to go out and we do a survey to see if there are nests before we build. So this was a site over here where we were gonna build a building. So they went out and did a nest survey because there were a lot of trees. This was before our tree conservation plan. But they identified, I know it's very hard to see, but yellow were were empty nests that they took out. I think the green are nests that were inside a tree, like a cavity, like a hole in a tree. They had to check to see, is there anybody in there, and if not, out came the nest. Anyway, they had the two purplish ones. They're really hard to see. There's one way up here in the top corner and one way down here. Those were active nests, meaning there were eggs inside. So that was a no-touchy area. They have to wait until the fledglings have flown, and once the nest is empty, then they can remove it. But a lot of people think, oh, nest, that's trees. But actually, there's a lot of species that nest on the ground. So here was a site right next to where aircraft are operating, and they found a nest in the grass, you know, and they had to wait till the little birds flew away. So we try and protect them to the extent we can. I mean, some people say, well, how do you mow the airport? Because we have to keep the airport mowed. So we can't in all cases, and fortunately the law that governs that recognizes it. If it's not an intentional take, then there's some latitude. Watching our time, we're running out of time. So one of the things that we do proactively is we go out and assess the site. So this is the same site where we had the nest survey. The other thing we found, the little blue squiggly, was a water body that was determined to be jurisdictional. So it means it has connectivity, and so the Corps of Engineers says that that's kind of a protected stream. So rather than impact the stream, they redesigned the building to avoid the stream. So, but had we not, before we used to do this, you know, you go out there and here's my building. It's like when you're on top of the waters in the US, it's like, okay, how much do I owe? Let me just mitigate it, because I'm not moving my building. So what we try and do is proactively say, okay, hello, and then they design around it. So we had that example that was south of the airport. This one over here is in Irving, right off our east diagonal runway, where there was actually a lot of waters of the US, and wetlands, floodplain, and they were able to work around that and have developed the site. So I know we're running short on time, so talking about air quality. So our air quality is not good. Apparently the Dallas-Fort Worth area got a grade of F in our air quality. But the EPA recently reclassified the Dallas-Fort Worth region was one of the areas that got reclassified because we didn't meet our requirements for air quality. So the state has several air quality monitoring stations around. One is actually in Grapevine. And then they look at what are the average, what are the readings that they're getting. And you can see that it's trending down, which is great. But so is the standard. So it's like, I always hit it and then they lower the standard. But the goal was 75 parts per billion under the 2008 standard, and the region was at 76. But because we didn't meet it, now we're being downgraded. So that means when we build a project, so the threshold that we have to stay in is a lot tighter. So next slide real quick. So we have what's called general conformity threshold. It used to be at 100 tons per year. Then it dropped to 50 in 2019. In about another 30 days, it's gonna drop to 25. So when we're growing our airport, these are all aircraft type. So these aircraft on this side are small little regional jets you might get on if you're going from here to Texarkana. In the middle is the narrow bodies, which are like the Airbus and the 737s that you might fly if you're going from here to Phoenix or here to Chicago. But then on this side is the larger aircraft, the wide body. And you can kind of see, it doesn't take very many landing and takeoff of those aircraft before you start hitting those thresholds. So this makes it much more challenging for the airport to grow. But we are hugely important, not only to the local region, but to the national region. So we're working with the state on how we grow our airport. I think I've got a quick graphic, next slide. So this is just, one of the things we do too is we look at where do airplanes fly? And so obviously here's Grapevine Lakes and here's Grapevine. So what are those normal flight patterns? We measure noise, so these little cone things, they measure noise all the time. And they react to both aircraft and community sounds. So this is when the winds are out of the south. So they come in from the north, land from north to south, and then they take off to the south. So the blue aircraft, if you can tell, are departures, and then the reddish ones are arrivals. But then when the wind shifts, this is north flow. So, if you hear noise at your house, you might hear it some days and not others because you may be affected by one flow or the other. But these are our basic patterns. This is 70% of the year on average, that's 30%. So we watch that all the time as well. And I'm gonna flip it back to you, Lauren, I know we're running out of time here.
And then, I hope you can tell, we're very passionate about protecting our environmental resources,
We
and
are.
we like to share that message with our surrounding communities. One of the ways we do that is through our Earth Day outreach program, and it's something we've been doing for, I don't know, probably more than 15 years at this point, and it's a way for us to engage with our local school communities and educate them on environmental topics. As things have changed in the world, such as COVID, we ended up transitioning to an online platform this last year, and so our theme this last year was DFW Naturally Amazing, looking at all the different natural resources at the airport, but also within our region that make us unique and hopefully spark an interest in the next generation. So we put together different lab STEAM activity kits that schools could register for and send them out to those schools. And we had a different theme for each week in the month of April. So butterfly migration, rocks and minerals, looking at the different natural geologic features in the area, how soil is impacting our surface water quality, and then looking at urban wildlife and identifying mammal tracks with sand trap tracks. In addition to sending the kits out to the schools, we worked with some of our local experts to develop some learning videos. So we partnered with UTA College of Science, the John Bunker Sands Wetlands Center, Butterfly Guide, as well as our own DFW Ops Wildlife team to put together some educational videos that accompanied the lab activity kits. Through that, we were able to reach kids in grades K through 12. We had over 94 schools registered to participate, some of them even out of the state. And then we distributed 230 kits to the schools, and the teachers reported we were reaching roughly 22,000 kids with that activity. So we're always looking to grow, and if you know of any other schools that would be interested in participating, let us know and we'll get them on our email list. We're always looking for opportunities to spread the word.
Those aren't available to the general public then?
Yes, you can register for them. We had some people with the, I forget the town, but they're Keep Lindsay Beautiful registered for it and did some outreach with the materials we provided. So
I know even like homeschoolers, you know,
Yeah,
they
homeschoolers.
signed up, yeah.
Schools,
And the website is there, dfwearthday.com. And you can go there and you can look at the videos, and there's some really amazing things that we put on that website.
And if you're interested, we also had links to ways you could purchase the materials yourself without having to register for a kit if you wanted to do it year-round.
So I think that was our last slide. We did bring some fun things. So I brought a flyer about the electric central utility plant. You're welcome to pick those up and learn more about it. We also brought this thing called a plane spotter, so you could wow your neighbors by, oh look, there goes a 767-300, you know. But it tells you all about aircraft and helps you identify the aircraft, so those are fun. The other thing we brought, this was one of our initiatives in the terminal, this is a silicone straw that you can put in your pocket, put in your purse, take with you. And when you get to the restaurant, would you like a straw? No, thank you. And they're reusable, they're easy to wash up, and you can roll them back up, stick them in here. So help yourself to any of this, and any other questions we can answer before we wrap up.
The Dallas Morning News this morning featured the first all-electric plane.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
I heard it was launching, but I did not see that. I'll have to look that up. Wow, that is so cool. Yep.
Sounds like you guys are doing a great job.
Yes.
Very impressive.
Thank you.